Take me as your pet. The desperate cry echoes through the dimly lit palace corridor, stopping Roy Gordon in his tracks. The human diplomat turns, his eyes widening at the sight before him. Princess Flora, heir to the Everin throne, kneels on the cold marble floor, her iridescent skin shimmering in the low light. Clutched tightly to her chest is her young daughter, Lila, whose large, frightened eyes dart between Roy and her mother. Roy's mind races, struggling to process the scene unfolding before him. The princess's mesmerizing eyes, filled with tears, lock onto his. Her plea hangs in the air, urgent and unexpected. Roy's years of diplomatic training haven't prepared him for this moment. "Your Highness," he begins, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "I don't understand. What do you mean by pet?" Flora's voice quivers as she explains. "My mate is dead, Roy. My enemies seek to use Lila as a pawn in their political games. If you claim us as your pets, we'll have diplomatic immunity under human law. It's our only hope for survival." The gravity of the situation crashes down on Roy. He knows that accepting Flora's request could spark an interstellar incident, potentially jeopardizing the delicate peace between humans and Everins. Yet the fear in Flora's eyes and the trembling form of little Lila tug at his conscience. Before Roy can respond, alarms blare throughout the palace. The piercing sound fills the corridor, drowning out the princess's soft sobs. Flora's head snaps up, her eyes wide with terror. "They're here," she whispers. "My rivals have launched their coup. They'll kill us both if they find us." The situation escalates from diplomatic dilemma to life-or-death crisis in an instant. Roy's hand moves to the communication device at his belt, ready to call for backup. But before he can activate it, heavy footsteps echo from around the corner. Captain Sarah Chen, Roy's human security detail, appears, her face etched with urgency. "Ambassador Gordon, we need to move now. Our extraction ship is waiting, but we only have room for one additional passenger." Roy's heart pounds in his chest as he faces an impossible choice. Save the princess and her daughter, potentially triggering an interstellar conflict, or follow protocol and leave them to an uncertain fate. The sounds of fighting grow closer. Shouts and the unmistakable crack of energy weapons fill the air. Time is running out. Roy looks down at Flora and Lila, then back to Captain Chen. The weight of two worlds rests on his shoulders. Whatever he decides will have far-reaching consequences for both humanity and the Everins. With a deep breath, Roy makes his choice, knowing that the next few moments will change the course of interstellar relations forever. Roy's decision crystallized in an instant. He couldn't abandon Flora and Lila to certain death, regardless of the potential diplomatic fallout. Turning to Captain Chen, he spoke with unwavering willpower. "We're taking them with us, both of them." Chen's eyes widened, but she nodded sharply, years of military discipline kicking in. "Understood, sir. We need to move now." Roy extended his hand to Flora, helping her and Lila to their feet. "You're under my protection now. Stay close." The princess's grip tightened on his arm, her skin cool and smooth against his. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with relief and fear. As they raced through the palace corridors, the sounds of battle grew louder. Explosions rocked the building, sending chunks of ornate stonework crashing to the floor. Roy led the group, with Chen bringing up the rear, her weapon at the ready. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a squad of Everin rebels. The aliens' bioluminescent skin pulsed with aggression, their elongated limbs tensed for combat. Roy reacted instinctively, pushing Flora and Lila behind him. The first rebel lunged forward, its clawed hands reaching for Roy's throat. He ducked under the attack, years of combat training taking over. Roy's fist connected with the alien's midsection, finding the soft spot between its armored plates. The rebel crumpled, gasping. Two more rushed him. Roy spun, using the momentum to drive his elbow into one attacker's face, while sweeping the legs out from under the other. He fought with controlled fury, each move precise and devastating. Captain Chen joined the fray, her military-grade stun baton crackling with energy as she engaged the remaining rebels. Between them, they made short work of the squad, leaving a trail of unconscious bodies in their wake. Flora stared at Roy, her luminous eyes wide with a mixture of awe and something else he couldn't quite identify. I've never seen a human move like that, she murmured. Roy allowed himself a grim smile. Let's hope you don't have to see it again. We need to keep moving. They pressed on, the extraction point drawing nearer. As they approached the landing pad, Roy's comm unit crackled to life. The pilot's voice came through, tense and urgent. Ambassador, we've got a problem. The ship's only rated for 2 passengers. We don't have room for extras. Roy's mind raced, considering and discarding options in rapid succession. They couldn't leave anyone behind, but the alternative seemed impossible. Unless... Jettison all non-essential equipment, he ordered. We'll make room. Sir, that's not advisable. Do it, Roy cut him off. That's an order. When they reached the ship, Roy saw the results of his command. The sleek diplomatic vessel looked stripped down, its elegant lines marred by open panels and empty storage compartments. It would be a tight fit, but it would have to do. As they boarded, Captain Chen hesitated. Sir, the child, she'll slow us down. Maybe we should... No, Roy's voice was steel. We're not separating them. Everyone in, now. They crammed into the ship, bodies pressed tightly together in the confined space. Roy found himself wedged between Flora and the bulkhead, her alien form molded against him. As the ship lifted off, the palace erupted in a massive explosion behind them, the shockwave buffeting their small craft. Flora clung to Roy, her body trembling. He felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness, mixed with something else he couldn't quite name. Her scent, exotic and intoxicating, filled his nostrils, making it hard to think clearly. Rebel ships in pursuit, Chen called from the pilot's seat. Hang on, this is going to get rough. The ship banked hard, climbing into Evora's turbulent upper atmosphere. Outside the viewports, massive storm systems raged, bolts of alien lightning arcing between roiling clouds. Roy leaned forward, his diplomatic knowledge proving unexpectedly useful. There's a band of electromagnetic disturbances at the equator. If we can reach it, it should mask our signature. Chen nodded, adjusting their course. The ship shuddered as they pushed through layers of corrosive gases and radiation belts. Roy felt Flora's grip tighten, her face pressed against his chest. Lila whimpered softly, and he reached out to squeeze the child's hand reassuringly. They emerged from the atmosphere, the pursuing ships lost in the planetary interference. But their troubles were just the beginning. The human spaceport loomed ahead, its familiar contours now menacing. The port's been compromised, Chen reported grimly. Rebels have taken control. We don't have enough fuel to reach the next nearest station. Roy's mind raced, weighing their limited options. They could try to slip past the rebels, but if they were caught, it would mean certain death. Yet the alternative, being stranded in space, was equally grim. He made his decision. Take us in. We'll use Flora's codes to bluff our way through. As they approached the spaceport, Roy turned to Flora. I need you to transmit a message using your royal authorization. Tell them you've captured our ship. It should buy us enough time to dock before they realize the deception. Flora nodded, her fingers dancing over the unfamiliar human console. Roy watched her work, struck by her grace even in this moment of crisis. As the false message was sent, they held their breath, waiting to see if their gambit would pay off. The spaceport's docking bay doors slid open, and Chen guided their battered ship inside. They had made it this far, but Roy knew the real challenge was just beginning. As the ship settled onto the landing pad, he turned to his unlikely companions, his voice low and urgent. From here on out, we're in hostile territory. Flora, you'll need to pose as our captor. It's the only way we'll make it to the diplomatic quarter. He met her gaze, seeing the fear and tenacity in her alien eyes. Are you ready? Flora squared her shoulders, her regal bearing asserting itself. I am. Let's go. As they prepared to disembark, Roy couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The weight of two worlds rested on his shoulders, and the path ahead was fraught with danger. But with Flora at his side and Lila's small hand in his, he felt a strange sense of purpose. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As they stepped off the ship, Roy's mind raced with possibilities. The spaceport bustled with activity, a mix of humans and Everans moving about their business. seemingly unaware of the high-stakes drama unfolding in their midst. Flora, now playing the role of captor, stood tall and regal, her iridescent skin pulsing with an authoritative glow. Roy and Chen, feigning submission, walked slightly behind her, with Lila nestled protectively in Roy's arms. They had barely made it halfway across the hangar when a booming voice cut through the ambient noise. "Princess Flora, what an unexpected pleasure!" Roy's heart sank as he recognized the speaker. Commander Zax, leader of the Averin rebels. The hulking alien strode towards them, his massive frame dwarfing even the tallest humans in the vicinity. Zax's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene before him. "And what have we here? Human prisoners?" Flora lifted her chin, her voice steady despite the fear Roy could sense radiating from her. "These humans attempted to interfere with our internal affairs. I've taken them into custody and intend to use them as bargaining chips in our negotiations with Earth." For a moment, Roy thought their ruse might work, but then Zax's mouth twisted into a cruel smile. "A clever lie, Your Highness, but my sources inform me that you fled the palace with these very same humans." He turned to address the growing crowd. "Behold, the traitorous princess, conspiring with aliens against her own people." Murmurs rippled through the assembled Everins and humans alike. Roy felt the situation slipping out of control. He stepped forward, his diplomatic instincts kicking in. "Commander Zax, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. As an official representative of Earth, Zax cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Silence, human. This is an Everin matter." He focused his attention back on Flora. "Princess, you and your half-breed spawn will submit to my authority, or face the consequences." Roy saw Flora's composure crack, her luminous eyes widening in fear. Before he could intervene, Captain Chen spoke up, her voice hard. "You have no jurisdiction over Earth citizens, Commander. We'll be leaving now." Zax let out a booming laugh. "Oh, I think not." He gestured, and suddenly they were surrounded by armed Everin rebels. "You see, this spaceport is under new management." Roy's mind raced, searching for a way out of this escalating crisis. He locked eyes with Flora, seeing the desperation in her alien gaze. In that moment, he made a decision that would alter the course of human-Everin relations forever. "I challenge you, Commander Zax," Roy declared, his voice ringing out across the hangar, "to single combat, as is the Everin way." A hush fell over the crowd. Zax stared at Roy, momentarily stunned by the human's audacity. Then he threw back his head and roared with laughter. "You? A soft human diplomat? Very well, I accept. When I crush you, it will serve as a lesson to all who would defy the new order." Roy handed Lila to Chen, ignoring her look of disbelief. He turned to Flora, whose bioluminescence had dimmed with worry. "Trust me," he whispered. Within minutes, a makeshift combat arena was cleared in the center of the hangar. Humans and Everins alike gathered around, eager to witness this unprecedented confrontation. Roy stood at one end, trying to calm his racing heart. Across from him, Zax loomed, a mountain of alien muscle and aggression. As the signal to begin was given, Roy immediately realized the enormity of his mistake. Zax moved with a speed belying his size, closing the distance between them in an instant. Roy barely managed to dodge the first crushing blow, feeling the wind of it rush past his face. He backpedaled, desperately trying to put some distance between himself and the Everin juggernaut. Zax pressed his advantage, raining down blows that Roy could only narrowly avoid. Each near miss sent shockwaves through Roy's body, a testament to the raw power behind Zax's attacks. Roy's mind worked furiously, searching for a weakness, any advantage he could exploit. He ducked under another swing, using his smaller size to slip past Zax's guard. He landed a quick series of strikes to the Everin's midsection, but they seemed to have little effect. Zax's hand shot out, catching Roy by the front of his shirt. With terrifying ease, the Everin commander lifted Roy off his feet and hurled him across the arena. Roy hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. As he struggled to his feet, gasping for breath, Roy caught sight of Flora at the edge of the arena. Her alien features were contorted with fear, and something else, concentration. Suddenly, the air was filled with a sweet, intoxicating scent. Roy felt a rush of energy course through his body. His vision sharpened, his muscles tensed with newfound strength. He realized with a start that Flora was emitting some kind of pheromone, a biological response to the stress of the situation. Zax charged again, but this time, Roy was ready. He sidestepped the attack, using the Everand's momentum against him. Roy's hand struck out, finding a soft spot between Zax's armored plates. The commander grunted in pain, stumbling for the first time. Emboldened, Roy pressed his advantage. He moved with a speed and precision he'd never known before, landing strike after strike on Zax's vulnerable points. The Everand's movements became sluggish, his attacks wild and unfocused. In a final desperate move, Zax lunged forward, trying to grapple Roy to the ground. But Roy was ready. He used Zax's own weight against him, redirecting his charge and sending the massive alien crashing to the floor. Before Zax could recover, Roy was on him, pinning him in a hold that signaled victory in Everand combat traditions. The hangar fell silent, the assembled crowd stunned by the unexpected outcome. Roy held the pin for a moment longer, then released Zax and stood, his chest heaving with exertion. "The combat is concluded," Roy announced, his voice carrying across the silent hangar. "By your own laws, Commander Zax, you must honor the terms of my victory. Grant us safe passage to the human embassy section." Zax rose slowly, his bioluminescence pulsing with a mix of anger and grudging respect. "So be it, human. You have won. For now." As Roy turned to rejoin Flora, Chen, and Lila, he caught Flora's eye. The look she gave him was filled with gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that made his heart race in a way that had nothing to do with the recent combat. They made their way towards the human embassy section, the crowd parting before them. Roy could feel the effects of Flora's pheromones lingering in his system, heightening his awareness of her presence beside him. He knew that the real challenges were just beginning, but for now they had won a crucial victory. As they approached the embassy doors, Roy's communication device buzzed. Earth was calling, and he knew the next few moments would shape the future of human-Everand relations. With a deep breath, he prepared to face a different kind of battle, one of diplomacy, politics, and the unexpected complications of interspecies attraction. Romance. Taking a deep breath, Roy answered the call. "Roy, what in God's name is happening down there?" The holographic image of Admiral Hawthorne, Earth's chief diplomat to Evora, flickered to life before them. Roy quickly summarized the situation, his words clipped and urgent. "The situation has deteriorated rapidly, sir. The Everand rebels have taken control of the spaceport, and we've barely escaped capture. Princess Flora and her daughter are with us, but we're in imminent danger." The Admiral's face grew grave. "This is a diplomatic nightmare, Roy. We can't afford an interstellar incident." Roy's teeth gritted. He glanced at Flora, her alien features etched with worry, and at Lila, clinging to her mother's side. In that moment, he made a decision that would alter the course of his career and potentially reshape human-Everand relations. "With all due respect, sir, we don't have time for diplomatic niceties. I'm evacuating the princess and her daughter immediately." He cut the transmission before the Admiral could protest, turning to Captain Chen. "We need a fast shuttle now." Chen nodded, her expression grim but determined. "I know just the one. Follow me." As they raced through the embassy corridors, Roy used his diplomatic clearance to override security protocols, sealing off sections behind them to slow down any pursuers. The distant sound of weapons fire grew louder, spurring them on. They burst into the docking bay just as an explosion rocked the building. A sleek silver shuttle stood ready, its engines already humming to life under Chen's remote commands. "Go!" Roy shouted, ushering Flora and Lila towards the shuttle. He helped them aboard, his hand lingering on Flora's arm for a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. As Chen prepped for launch, a squad of Everand commandos rounded the corner, their weapons raised. Roy's body moved on instinct, placing himself between the attackers and the shuttle. The first Everand charged, its massive form a blur of motion. Roy ducked under its swing, using the alien's momentum to throw it off balance. He spun, delivering a sharp elbow to its midsection, finding the weak spot between armored plates. Two more commandos rushed him. Roy weaved and dodged, his movements enhanced by the lingering effects of Flora's pheromones. He landed precise strikes, exploiting the vulnerabilities in Everan physiology he'd learned during his diplomatic training. A searing pain lanced through his side as a glancing blow caught him. Roy stumbled but kept fighting, aware that every second he bought was crucial for the shuttle's escape. "Roy!" Flora's voice cut through the chaos. "We're ready!" With a final, desperate effort, Roy broke free from the melee. He sprinted towards the shuttle, diving through the closing hatch as Chen lifted off. The vessel rocketed out of the docking bay, leaving the stunned Everan forces behind. As the shuttle broke atmosphere, Roy slumped against the wall, his hand pressed to his injured side. Flora was at his side in an instant, her luminous eyes wide with concern. "You're hurt," she said, her delicate fingers probing the wound. Roy winced but managed a smile. "It's not as bad as it looks." Flora's bioluminescence pulsed softly as she concentrated. "I have some knowledge of human physiology. Let me help." As she tended to his injury, Roy became acutely aware of her closeness, the sweet scent of her pheromones filling his senses. He tried to focus on the tactical situation, but found his thoughts continually drawn back to the alien princess. "Multiple Everan warships detected," Chen called from the pilot's seat. "They're in pursuit." Roy forced himself to his feet, ignoring the pain in his side. "Set a course for the Nix Nebula. The asteroid fields there should give us cover." As Chen skillfully piloted the shuttle through the treacherous asteroids, Roy used his diplomatic knowledge to guide them through contested space. He directed them towards neutral territories, hoping to find safe harbor. During a brief lull in the pursuit, Flora approached Roy, her expression serious. "There's something you should know about my species," she began. "The pheromones you've experienced, they're more than just a biological quirk." Roy listened intently as Flora explained the evolutionary purpose behind her species' unique biology. The pheromones were designed to forge strong bonds with potential mates, ensuring the survival of the royal lineage. As he processed this information, Roy felt a mix of fascination and concern. The attraction he felt towards Flora was undeniable, but was it genuine or merely a product of alien biochemistry? Before he could dwell on these thoughts, the shuttle systems blared a warning. "Fuel reserves critical," Chen announced. "We need to land soon." Roy scanned the navigation charts, his heart sinking as he realized their options were limited. "There," he said, pointing to a pulsing dot on the screen. "Nexus 6, it's our only choice." As they approached the notorious trading hub, Roy's mind raced with plans. They would need disguises, supplies, and information. And somehow, in this den of criminals and opportunists, they would have to find a way to refuel and escape before their enemies caught up with them. The shuttle began its descent towards Nexus 6 main spaceport, the chaotic sprawl of the lawless planet growing larger in the view screen. Roy met Flora's gaze, seeing his own drive reflected in her alien eyes. Whatever challenges awaited them on the surface, they would face them together. Together. As the shuttle touched down on the chaotic surface of Nexus 6, Roy steeled himself for the challenges ahead. The moment the hatch opened, a wave of noise and stench assaulted their senses. The spaceport was a cacophony of alien languages, blaring announcements, and the constant hum of machinery. Beings of all shapes and sizes bustled about, most pointedly ignoring the newcomers. "Stay close," Roy instructed, his eyes scanning the crowd for potential threats. "We need to find a safe place to regroup and plan our next move." They had barely taken a dozen steps when a surge in the crowd separated them. Roy found himself pushed back, losing sight of Flora and Lila in the sea of alien bodies. "Flora!" he shouted, fighting against the tide of beings. "Lila!" Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but Roy forced it down. He needed to think clearly. Drawing on his diplomatic training, he began to navigate the complex social dynamics of the spaceport. He approached a Zyraxian information broker, its tentacles waving lazily as it processed data streams. "I seek information on 2 Everans," Roy said, careful to use the proper honorifics in the Zyraxian tongue. "A matter of great importance." The broker's eye stalk swiveled towards him. "Information has a price, human." Roy nodded, reaching into his pocket. He produced a small data chip, one he'd been saving for emergencies. This contains encrypted Terran trade routes. I trust it's sufficient? The Zeraxian's tentacles twitched with interest. It took the chip, interfacing with it briefly, before nodding. The Everans you seek passed this way not long ago. They were heading towards the Crimson Sector. Roy's heart sank. The Crimson Sector was notorious even by Nexus 6 standards, but he had no choice. He thanked the broker and set off, his pace quickening. Meanwhile, Flora found herself in an entirely different predicament. Separated from Roy and surrounded by potential enemies, she drew herself up to her full height, channeling every ounce of her royal bearing. "I am Princess Flora of Evora," she announced, her voice carrying over the din. "I require assistance and protection for myself and my child." Her pheromones, intensified by stress, began to affect those around her. Several aliens stepped forward, their expressions a mix of awe and sudden loyalty. "We are at your service, Your Highness," a hulking Krillorian rumbled, bowing its armored head. Flora nodded regally, relief washing over her. "We must find a safe haven, away from prying eyes." With her makeshift entourage surrounding her and Lila, Flora began to make her way through the spaceport. She used her newfound influence carefully, gathering information and avoiding potential threats. As they moved deeper into the station, Flora's thoughts turned to Roy. She worried for his safety, but also felt a strange certainty that he would find them. The bond between them, strengthened by her pheromones, seemed to pulse like a beacon. Roy's search led him to a seedy cantina on the outskirts of the spaceport. The air inside was thick with smoke and the scent of alien intoxicants. He scanned the room, his heart leaping when he spotted Flora's distinctive bioluminescence in a dark corner. He made his way towards them, relief flooding through him. But just as he reached their table, a familiar voice froze him in his tracks. Well, what have we here?" Roy turned slowly to face Krax, the notorious bounty hunter. The Silax tentacles writhed in anticipation, his compound eyes gleaming with greed. "Step aside, human," Krax hissed. "The Everan princess is worth a fortune, and I intend to collect." Roy's mind raced, assessing the situation. Krax's crew had them surrounded, weapons trained on their group. A direct confrontation would be disastrous. "Let's not be hasty," Roy said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone." As he spoke, he felt a subtle shift in the air. Flora's pheromones were intensifying, affecting both him and their attackers. Roy's senses sharpened, his reflexes heightening. Krax blinked, his tentacles twitching in confusion. What's happening?" Roy seized the moment of disorientation. He moved with lightning speed, disarming the nearest of Krax's crew and using the alien's own weapon to stun it. Flora's entourage sprang into action, creating a protective barrier around her and Lila. "Now!" Roy shouted, grabbing Flora's hand. They burst out of the cantina, diving into a maze of back alleys and maintenance tunnels. Roy's enhanced reflexes allowed him to navigate the treacherous terrain, guiding them away from their pursuers. As they paused to catch their breath in a dimly lit corridor, Flora placed a hand on Roy's arm. "Roy," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. Before she could finish, a group of figures emerged from the shadows. Roy tensed, ready for another fight, but Flora's gasp of recognition stopped him. "Your Highness," one of the figures said, stepping into the light. "We are loyal to the true Everan throne. We're here to help." Roy eyed them warily, but Flora's nod of acceptance was enough for him. The leader of the Loyalists, an Everan named Vex, quickly brought them up to speed. "We have a secure comm channel," Vex explained, producing a small device. "You can contact your pilot." Roy took the device gratefully, quickly establishing contact with Chen. Her voice crackled through the speaker, tense but determined. "The shuttle's repaired," Chen reported, "but we're surrounded by hostile forces. It's going to be one hell of an extraction." Roy's mind whirled, formulating a plan. He turned to Vex and the other Loyalists. "We need a diversion, something big enough to draw attention away from the main hangar." Vex's bioluminescence pulsed with excitement. "We can arrange that. Give us 10 minutes. As the Loyalists hurried off to set their plan in motion, Roy turned to Flora and Lila. The young princess clung to her mother, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. "We're almost there," Roy assured them both, his voice soft but firm. "Just a little longer." Flora nodded, her expression a mix of trust and grit. "We're ready," she said, speaking for both herself and Lila. The next few minutes passed in tense silence. Then suddenly, the entire station shook with a series of explosions. Alarms blared, and the corridors filled with panicked beings rushing in all directions. "That's our cue," Roy said, leading them towards the main hangar. They moved swiftly through the chaos, using the confusion to their advantage. As they approached the hangar entrance, Roy's heart sank. A familiar figure stood blocking their path, energy weapon in hand. Commander Zax's eyes narrowed as he spotted them. "I knew you'd come this way," he growled. "It ends here, human." Roy stepped forward, placing himself between Zax and the others. He knew what he had to do. "You want to end this?" Roy called out, his voice carrying over the din of the panicked spaceport. "Then let's settle it. You and me, right now." Zax's bioluminescence pulsed with anticipation. "A rematch? Very well. But this time, we fight with these." He tossed an energy weapon to Roy, who caught it deftly. As Roy squared off against Zax, he could feel Flora's pheromones intensifying once again. The world seemed to slow down around him, every detail coming into sharp focus. Zax fired first, a bolt of energy sizzling past Roy's ear. Roy rolled, returning fire as he came up. The two danced a deadly ballet, energy blasts scorching the walls and floor around them. Flora watched, her heart racing, as Roy and Zax battled. She could see the effect her pheromones were having on both of them. Roy's movements were fluid and precise, while Zax became increasingly erratic. In a crucial moment, Roy saw his opening. He feinted left, then darted right, bringing his weapon up under Zax's guard. With a quick twist, he disarmed the Everin commander, sending Zax's weapon clattering across the floor. "Yield!" Roy demanded, his own weapon trained on Zax. "By your own honor code, you must accept defeat." Zax's bioluminescence flickered with rage and grudging respect. "You fight well, human," he growled. "I yield, for now." With Zax neutralized, Roy quickly ushered Flora and Lila towards the waiting shuttle. Chen had the engines primed, ready for immediate takeoff. As they strapped in, Roy felt a moment of triumph. They had made it. But as the shuttle lifted off, breaking through the spaceport's protective field, a new threat loomed before them. An Everin battlecruiser hung in orbit, its weapons trained on their small vessel. A transmission crackled through their comm system. "Unidentified shuttle," a stern voice announced. "You are carrying fugitives of the Everin state. Surrender immediately or be destroyed." Roy's mind raced, searching for a solution. But before he could respond, space seemed to tear open beside them. A massive ship emerged from hyperspace, its design unmistakably human. A new voice cut through the tension. "This is Admiral Helena Frost of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. Stand down immediately. This situation is now under Earth's protection." Admiral Frost's voice boomed across the comm channels. "Any hostile action against this shuttle will be considered an act of war against the Terran Alliance." Roy exhaled sharply, his hands still gripping the controls. The Everin battlecruiser hung motionless in space, its weapons powered but not firing. For a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, the battlecruiser's weapon systems began to power down. Roy allowed himself a small smile of relief, but he knew this was nowhere near the end. Admiral Frost's ship, the TAS Peacemaker, dwarfed their shuttle as it maneuvered into a protective position. "Shuttle Delta 3, you are cleared for docking," a crisp voice announced over the comm. "Proceed to Bay 7. As Roy guided the shuttle towards the massive human vessel, Flora placed a hand on his arm. "What happens now?" she asked, her bioluminescence pulsing with concern. "Now," Roy said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system, "we negotiate." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. As soon as they docked, Roy and Flora were whisked away to separate debriefing rooms. Lila, overwhelmed by the events, was taken to the ship's medical bay for observation. Roy found himself face-to-face with Admiral Helena Frost, a woman whose reputation preceded her. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes seemed to pierce right through him. "Diplomat Roy Chen," she said, her voice clipped. You've caused quite the interstellar incident. Roy straightened his posture. Admiral, I assure you. She held up a hand, silencing him. Save it for the formal debrief. Right now, we need to prepare for negotiations with the Everin representatives. Roy's eyebrows shot up. Negotiations? Already? Admiral Frost's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. The Everins are eager to dedication this situation quickly. Commander Zax will be representing the rebel faction. Roy's mind raced. Zax, here? The same Everin he had bested in combat mere hours ago. As if reading his thoughts, Admiral Frost continued, Yes, the very same. He's agreed to participate in diplomatic talks. It seems your little showdown on Nexus 6 made quite an impression. Before Roy could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Zan Liang, the ship's chief medical officer, entered the room. Admiral, I have the preliminary results of Diplomat Chen's medical scan, Dr. Liang said, her eyes flicking to Roy. Admiral Frost nodded. Go ahead, Doctor. Dr. Liang cleared her throat. It appears that prolonged exposure to Everan pheromones has resulted in significant changes to Diplomat Chen's brain chemistry. These changes could potentially impact his decision-making abilities. Roy felt a chill run down his spine. He had been aware of Flora's effect on him, but he hadn't realized the extent of it. Admiral Frost's eyes narrowed. Is there a way to counteract these effects? Dr. Liang hesitated. We have an experimental treatment that could temporarily neutralize the pheromone's influence. However, it's not without risks. Roy stepped forward. I'll do it, he said firmly. If it means I can participate in the negotiations with a clear head, I'll take the risk. Admiral Frost studied him for a moment, then nodded. Very well. Dr. Liang, proceed with the treatment. We need Diplomat Chen at his best for these talks. As Roy followed Dr. Liang out of the room, his mind whirled with the implications of what was to come. He thought of Flora, of the complex web of biology and emotion that connected them, and he thought of the negotiations ahead, where the fate of two species would hang in the balance. The experimental treatment left Roy feeling simultaneously sharper and more detached. As he entered the conference room, he found he could analyze the political dynamics at play with unprecedented clarity. Commander Zax sat across the table, his posture rigid, but his bioluminescence betraying a mix of emotions. Next to him sat other Everin representatives, their expressions guarded. Flora entered last, escorted by two human officers. She took her place beside Roy, officially still under his protection as his pet. The absurdity of the situation struck Roy, but he pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. Admiral Frost opened the proceedings, her voice filling the room. We are gathered here to address the current political situation on Evora and to determine the status of Princess Flora and her daughter, Lila. As the initial statements were made, Roy's enhanced cognition allowed him to see beyond the surface tensions. He noted the subtle shifts in bioluminescence among the Everin delegates, the micro-expressions on Admiral Frost's face, the way Flora's pheromones seemed to subtly influence the room's atmosphere, despite the dampening effects of his treatment. When it was his turn to speak, Roy found himself proposing a solution that had crystallized in his mind moments before. I suggest a joint human-Everin protectorate over Evora, he said, his voice clear and confident. Princess Flora would be reinstated as the planet's leader, guided by an interspecies council. The room erupted in a flurry of reactions. Commander Zax's bioluminescence flared with surprise and tentative interest. Admiral Frost leaned forward, her eyes sharp with calculation. As the discussions intensified, Roy navigated the complex web of interspecies politics with a dexterity that surprised even himself. He found common ground where others saw only conflict, proposed compromises that addressed the core concerns of both sides. But even as he excelled in the negotiations, Roy was acutely aware of a growing internal conflict. The treatment had given him clarity, yes, but it had also forced him to confront the true nature of his feelings for Flora. He could see now how much their bond had been shaped by biology, by the interplay of pheromones and instincts. As the talks approached a critical juncture, Roy's enhanced cognitive state began to fade. The full weight of his emotional journey crashed over him, leaving him grappling with questions of duty, love, and the very nature of interspecies relationships. A sudden commotion outside the conference room drew everyone's attention. Captain Sarah Chen burst in, her face tight with urgency. "Admiral," she said, saluting quickly, "we've received intelligence that a radical faction of Everin rebels is planning an attack on this vessel. They're not happy with Commander Zax's participation in these talks." The room erupted in chaos, but even as others panicked, Roy felt a strange calm settle over him. He looked at Flora, at Commander Zax, at Admiral Frost, and in that moment, he knew exactly what needed to be done. "I have a plan," Roy said, his voice cutting through the noise. All eyes turned to him as he began to outline a strategy that would not only neutralize the threat, but potentially change the course of human-Everin relations forever. As Roy spoke, he could feel the last effects of the treatment slipping away, but the clarity it had given him remained, a guiding light as he prepared to face the challenges ahead. Whatever came next, he knew that the decisions made in the coming hours would shape not just his future, but the future of two worlds. Species hung in the balance. As the negotiation sessions stretched on, Roy found himself at the center of a diplomatic whirlwind. His proposal for a joint human-Everin protectorate over Evora gained traction, with both sides recognizing the potential for mutual benefit. Admiral Frost's stern demeanor softened slightly as she watched Roy navigate the complex political landscape with skill and poise. After days of intense discussions, a historic treaty was finally signed. The agreement established a new governance structure for Evora, with Princess Flora reinstated as the planet's leader, guided by an interspecies council. As the ink dried on the document, Roy felt a profound sense of accomplishment wash over him. In the aftermath of the treaty signing, Roy found himself faced with a pivotal decision. Admiral Frost approached him with an offer he couldn't refuse. "Diplomat Chen," she said, her voice uncharacteristically warm, "your work here has been exemplary. We'd like to offer you a long-term position as Earth's primary liaison to Evora. Your understanding of both cultures makes you uniquely qualified for this role." Roy's mind raced as he considered the implications. He thought of the challenges ahead, the opportunity to shape the future of human-Everin relations, and inevitably, of Flora. After a moment of careful deliberation, he nodded. "I accept, Admiral. Thank you for this opportunity." With his new role established, Roy relocated to Evora's capital city. The following weeks were a blur of activity as he worked closely with Flora to implement the joint governance structure. They spent long hours together, poring over policy documents and navigating the intricacies of interspecies diplomacy. As they worked side by side, Roy noticed a shift in his feelings for Flora. The overwhelming influence of her pheromones had faded, replaced by a deeper, more nuanced connection. He found himself drawn to her intelligence, her persistence, and the subtle ways her bioluminescence reflected her emotions. One evening, as they walked through the bioluminescent gardens of the capital, Flora turned to Roy, her skin pulsing with a soft, warm glow. "Roy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I want to thank you for everything you've done for my people, and for me." Roy felt a flutter in his chest as he met her gaze. "Flora, Their moment was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Captain Sarah Chen, her face tight with concern. "Diplomat Chen, Your Highness," she said, saluting quickly. "We've received reports of attacks on human outposts in the outer regions. It appears to be the work of isolationist Everins." The news hit Roy like a physical blow. He exchanged a worried glance with Flora, both of them acutely aware of the fragility of the peace they'd worked so hard to establish. "We need to respond quickly," Roy said, his mind already racing through potential solutions. "But we can't risk heavy-handed tactics that could undermine everything we've accomplished." Flora nodded, her bioluminescence pulsing with perseverance. "We'll need to combine our approaches, your human strategic thinking with our understanding of Everin culture." Over the next few days, Roy and Flora worked tirelessly to address the crisis. They crafted a response that blended diplomatic outreach with targeted security measures, carefully avoiding any actions that could be seen as an overreach by either species. Their combined approach proved effective. Through a series of negotiations and carefully planned interventions, They managed to de-escalate the situation without resorting to violence. As the tensions subsided, Roy couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what they had accomplished together. As the immediate crisis passed, Roy found himself spending more and more time with Flora outside of their official duties. They would often take long walks through the capital, discussing everything from interstellar politics to their personal hopes and dreams. During one such walk, Flora suddenly stopped, turning to face Roy. Her bioluminescence pulsed with a mix of nervousness and excitement. "Roy," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I've been meaning to talk to you about us. These past weeks, working together, I've felt something growing between us, something more than just a professional partnership." Roy's heart raced as he met her gaze. He had been grappling with his own feelings, unsure of how to navigate the complexities of an interspecies relationship. But in that moment, looking into Flora's eyes, he knew he couldn't deny the connection between them. "I've felt it too," he admitted, reaching out to take her hand. "I wasn't sure if it was just the lingering effects of your pheromones or if—" Flora's bioluminescence flared brightly. "It's more than that, Roy. I know it is." As they stood there hand in hand, Roy realized that they were stepping into uncharted territory. There would be challenges ahead, biological differences, cultural taboos, political implications. But as he looked at Flora, her skin glowing with warmth and affection, he knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Their moment of connection was interrupted by the sudden blaring of alarms throughout the capital. Emergency lights flashed, casting an eerie glow over the bioluminescent landscape. "What's happening?" Flora asked, her voice tight with concern. Before Roy could respond, his communication device buzzed urgently. He activated it to find Admiral Frost's stern face looking back at him. "Diplomat Chen," she said, her voice clipped and serious, "we have a situation. Intelligence reports indicate that a human supremacist group has infiltrated key positions within the Earth government. They're planning to sabotage the treaty and provoke a war between our species." Roy felt a chill run down his spine as he exchanged a worried glance with Flora. The peace they had worked so hard to build was now under threat from within. As alarms continued to blare around them, Roy knew that the true test of their partnership, both diplomatic and personal, was just beginning. The gravity of the situation hit Roy like a physical blow, but he forced himself to remain calm. "We need to act fast," Roy said, his mind already racing through potential strategies. He turned to Flora, her bioluminescence pulsing with a mix of concern and dedication. "We'll need to combine our strengths if we're going to stop this." Flora nodded, her eyes locked with Roy's. "I'll contact Commander Zax immediately. We'll need his support and connections within the Everin military." Roy activated his communication device again. "Captain Chen, I need you to assemble a team of our most trusted operatives, human and Everin. We have a conspiracy to unravel." Within hours, Roy and Flora had gathered a small but elite group in a secure location beneath the capital. Captain Sarah Chen stood at attention, her expression grim but resolute. Commander Zax's bioluminescence flickered with terrifying anger at the threat to the peace they'd worked so hard to achieve. Roy addressed the team, his voice low but intense. "We're facing a threat from within both our governments. Human supremacists have infiltrated key positions and are planning to sabotage everything we've built. Our mission is to expose them and prevent a war between our species." The team split into smaller groups, each tasked with investigating different leads. Roy and Flora worked tirelessly, using their combined diplomatic skills and royal influence to navigate the treacherous political landscape. They uncovered a web of corruption that stretched further than they'd initially feared, implicating high-ranking officials in both human and Everin governments. As they pieced together the conspiracy, Roy and Flora found themselves growing closer. The stress of their mission seemed to intensify their connection, each finding strength in the other's presence. Their investigation led them to a remote outpost on the outskirts of Everin territory. Intelligence suggested it was being used as a meeting point for the conspirators. Roy and Flora decided to investigate personally, despite the risks. As they approached the outpost under cover of darkness, Roy's enhanced senses, a lingering effect of his earlier treatment, picked up movement in the shadows. He barely had time to shout a warning before the night erupted in a hail of weapons fire. Roy and Flora dove for cover, the air around them alive with energy bolts and the sharp crack of conventional firearms. Roy's military training kicked in as he returned fire, his movements fluid and precise. Flora's bioluminescence flared brightly as she channeled her species' natural abilities. She moved with incredible speed, her form blurring as she closed the distance to their attackers. Roy watched in awe as she disarmed two assailants with swift, graceful movements. But they were outnumbered and outgunned. As Roy moved to flank their opponents, he saw a flash of movement out of the corner of his eye. A masked figure had Flora in their sights, weapon raised. Without hesitation, Roy threw himself into the line of fire. He felt a searing pain in his side as the energy bolt struck him, sending him crashing to the ground. Through the haze of pain, he heard Flora cry out his name. The world seemed to slow down as Roy struggled to stay conscious. He saw Flora's form blur with impossible speed, her bioluminescence pulsing with an intensity he'd never seen before. She moved through their attackers like a force of nature, her normally gentle demeanor replaced by a fierce perseverance. Roy's vision began to fade, the pain in his side becoming a dull throb. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Flora kneeling beside him, her skin glowing with concern and something else. Something that looked remarkably like love. When Roy awoke, he found himself in a secure medical facility. The sterile white walls and soft beeping of medical equipment were a far cry from the chaotic firefight he last remembered. He tried to sit up but winced as pain shot through his side. "Easy there, diplomat," a familiar voice said. Captain Sarah Chen stepped into view, a relieved smile on her face. "You've been out for a few days. That was a close call." Roy's mind immediately went to Flora. "Where's—" "She's fine," Chen assured him quickly. "Thanks to you. Once she got you to safety, she took charge of the entire operation. You should see her, Roy. She's been incredible." As if on cue, the door slid open and Flora entered. Her bioluminescence pulsed with a mix of relief and lingering concern as she approached Roy's bedside. "You're awake," she said softly, taking his hand in hers. "I was so worried." Roy squeezed her hand, feeling a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with his injury. "I hear you've been busy while I've been napping." Flora's skin flickered with a hint of amusement before turning serious. "The supremacists forced our hand when they attacked us. I had to act quickly." She explained how she had addressed both the Averan people and humanity, revealing the full extent of the conspiracy. Her impassioned speech, broadcast across both worlds, had turned public opinion firmly against the supremacists and strengthened support for the Human-Everan alliance. "But it's not over," Flora continued, her bioluminescence pulsing with purpose. "The supremacist leaders are planning a final desperate attack on the capital. We need to be ready." Roy nodded, his tactical mind already analyzing potential strategies. "Then let's get to work. We didn't come this far to fail now." As Flora helped Roy out of bed, their eyes met. In that moment, surrounded by the beeping of medical equipment and the looming threat of conflict, they both felt the shift in their relationship. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, not just as allies or friends, but as something more. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as Roy and Flora prepared for the impending attack. Despite his injury, Roy threw himself into coordinating the defense, working from the command center while Flora took charge of the ground forces. As reports came in of supremacist forces approaching the city, Roy felt a mix of anticipation and dread. He looked at the holographic display of the capital, watching as Allied units took up defensive positions. Flora's voice came through the comm system, calm and steady as she directed her troops. "This is it," Roy murmured to himself, his hands hovering over the control panel. "Everything we've worked for comes down to this." The first explosions rocked the city as the supremacists launched their assault. Roy's fingers flew over the controls, coordinating counterattacks and reinforcements. On the ground, Flora led the combined Human-Everan forces with a grace and ferocity that inspired all who fought alongside her. As the battle raged, Roy's enhanced perception allowed him to spot a weakness in the enemy's formation. He quickly relayed the information to Flora, who executed a daring maneuver that broke through the supremacist lines. The tide of the battle began to turn, but Roy knew the fight was far from finished. The supremacist leader was still out there, and as long as they remained at large, the threat to both their worlds would continue. Roy's gaze swept over the holographic display, searching for any sign of the elusive mastermind behind the conspiracy. Suddenly, a pattern caught his eye, a series of movements that seemed out of place amidst the chaos of the battle. "Flora," he said into his comm, his voice tight with anticipation. "I think I've found them."
If you finish this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.